All right, we come on the air with major breaking news tonight, 2 a.m. right now in Haifa, Israel, and Beirut, Lebanon. We are 2 hours away from a now humiliated Hezbollah entering into a ceasefire with Israel. And in this case, a ceasefire is a nice way of saying surrender. And today, President Biden, 54 days away from leaving office, took credit for it.
Lasting security for the people of Israel and Lebanon cannot be achieved only on the battlefield. And that's why I directed my team to work with the governments of Israel and Lebanon to forge a ceasefire, to bring a conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to a close.
Moments after the president offered those words, Israel launched yet another round of strikes into Beirut. Show you on the wall here, obviously, this is Israel. That is up into Beirut. Not that far in terms of flying, but Israel's taking apart the last parts of Hezbollah's military infrastructure. This is what was called Iran's Ring of Fire, right? The Houthis down here in Yemen, Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, Syria with Bashar al-Assad. You had Hezbollah in Lebanon, by far the premier military organization for Iran. And then you had Hamas inside Gaza. The Israelis took all of this apart, piece by piece, by defying the United States at every turn. When President Biden told them to de-escalate, the Israelis escalated over and over and over again. We'll take Gaza, for example, because that's what's been going on the longest and the biggest since October 7th. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, 15,000 fighters killed. Israel defied the United States. They went into the southern city of Rafah in Gaza and killed 15,000 fighters. Remember, Rafah was where Kamala Harris had seen the maps and told them not to go. In Rafah, they found Hamas's senior-most leader, Yahya Sinwar, known as the Butcher of Khan Yunis. He was the mastermind of the October 7th attacks. There he is, right there. He threw that stick at the Israeli drone and then was killed. Despite by the White House push to de-escalate, Israel continued with its ground operations. It took Sinwar out. In Lebanon, Israel has killed thousands of Hezbollah fighters. That's up to its north. And Hezbollah was always seen as a much better fighting force than Hamas. They killed the 5 senior leaders of Hezbollah, including Hassan Nasrallah. The White House repeatedly warned the Israelis not to engage. The Israelis did it anyways. And the perhaps final blow came in the form of a massive wave of airstrikes. Here it was, and you can watch. Israel hit 20 targets. Boom, 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 boom. 20 targets in 120 seconds. And of course, there was the air power, and then there was something that the world can never forget, which was the pager attacks in September. Took out thousands of Hezbollah fighters. Remember the video of the Hezbollah guys and their pagers going off and exploding? Couple of things that did, right? It terrorized Hezbollah that the Israelis had infiltrated them. But more importantly, we learned that the Israelis did not give the White House a heads up. That was huge. The Israelis expanded their reach into Syria. Bashar al-Assad, the Russians, Iran, all helping inside Syria. And the Israelis have gone after Syria over and over and over again. They launched the deadliest Israeli strike in Syria to date, killed 15 Hezbollah fighters, and 90 more proxy soldiers. In the past, the Israelis have gone in and killed a number of Iranian military officials, Revolutionary Guard officials inside of Syria. When it mattered most, the White House told Israel not to strike Iran, but the Israelis did that too a couple of months ago and took out a top-secret Iranian nuclear facility in the process. This was the video over Tehran of the missile defense systems for the Iranians completely failing. So I lived in the Middle East for 4 years, all sorts of conflicts, Gaza wars. I covered the Syria civil war. I covered Turkey, covered Libya. I covered Egypt. Being here, it's very easy to not understand Israel's disproportionate and overwhelming aggression and violence. Obviously, Joe Biden didn't understand it because he kept telling them not to do it. But today is proof that Hezbollah and Hamas and Iran are paper tigers. Israel exposed them and laid bare that there really wasn't much there. They took Hezbollah apart. The whole time, the White House talked about de-escalation. They lectured Benjamin Netanyahu about diplomacy and negotiations. In fact, President Biden held a celebration of the ceasefire again today, and once again demanded the Israelis offer concessions. Let me help you out with something. The Israelis basically told President Biden to go pound the very same sand they have been telling him to pound for the past 14 or so months. And with that, we welcome you to the fairest network on television. First tonight, the Israeli battle plan. Escalate to de-escalate. It worked perfectly for Israel. And now that's exactly the playbook Donald Trump promises to run here as president of the United States. Trump and his team promised round 2, version 2.0 of Trump would be unchained. That's what we're getting in his foreign policy. Take, for example, the warning to Russia from Trump's newly minted Deputy Assistant National Security Advisor.
I'll give one tip away that the president has mentioned. He will say to that murderous former KGB colonel, that thug who runs the Russian Federation, you will negotiate now, or the aid that we have given to Ukraine thus far will look like peanuts.
Escalate to de-escalate is also the Russian model. So, to be fair, 2 egomaniacs playing chicken with nuclear weapons could end, well, possibly badly. But that's what Trump's foreign policy 2.0 is, a giant game of chicken. He is threatening to unchain the Ukrainians against Russia. He's threatening China, Mexico, and Canada with massive tariffs. He wants Mexico to stop the flow of illegal immigrants and drugs. You may have heard about it today. The rest of the media freaked out and told us that we would all be paying $20 for avocados. Business leaders, analysts, pundits alike, including even our good friend Chris Cillizza.
The math and the economics is simple. Donald Trump makes it more expensive for these countries to bring goods into the U.S. These countries, in turn, raise prices on said goods in order to continue to make same profit on those goods, which means down the line, downstream, you, the consumer, pays more money for this $1.5 trillion in goods that are imported from these 3 countries into America.
Yes, that is how tariffs work. But Trump knows tariffs raise prices for the consumer. So that's why it's fair to say they're probably not going to happen. He's playing a very high-stakes game of poker. If he learned anything over the last year, it worked for Israel. We start tonight with radio talk show host, friend of the show, Hugh Hewitt. Hugh, it is good to see you. I want to talk to you about the tariffs here. To be fair, Trump says he's going to raise tariffs 25%. Is it not the media's responsibility to report on what a 25% tariff on everything coming in from China and Canada would mean?
Sure it is, Leland, and good evening. Thank you for having me, as always. It's important for people to understand it might raise, for example, the cost of oil imported from Canada. We get a lot of oil from Canada, and that will go up, and it would probably have an impact if that were to go into place in the Rocky Mountain. But these are national security tariffs. They are being imposed on Mexico, Canada, and China because it is from Mexico and Canada that we have migration problems, and it is from China, Mexico, and Canada that we have a fentanyl problem. What is the price of a life? And we lose about 100,000 people to overdoses every year. About 70% of them are fentanyl related. And so what Donald Trump is saying to China, Mexico, and Canada is get control of the fentanyl, get control of the migration, and this won't have to happen. And, of course, we will pay more for some products, and, of course, Mexico will retaliate. But this is one arena. This is not Smoot-Hawley. We're not going to bring about World War II or bring about a Great Depression because 3 countries get hit with some tariffs. What they are doing is what you just said, negotiating from a position of strength. The American economy is the greatest in the world by a lot. And I think Donald Trump, when he brings his big stick to this conversation, it's not going to bring about a depression. The market shrugged it off today. It's an opening bid by the president-elect to get the attention of 3 great offenders. And I think it was well done.
Well, he certainly got the attention of Justin Trudeau. I think he used to refer to him as Justin of Canada. Earlier, here he is talking to CBC.
I had a good call with Donald Trump last night again. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call. This is something that we can do.
So thank you, Hugh, for sitting through the long monologue and open. But is there some similarities to the Biden warnings all the time? Don't escalate, don't escalate. This is escalatory, on and on and on. And the Israelis just going out and doing their thing. And Donald Trump saying, I'm going to raise tariffs, and everybody going, oh, my God, everything's going to be so more expensive. And with less than 24 hours, Trudeau folds?
Well, I do think Trudeau is a notoriously erratic character. They had a pogrom in Montreal over the weekend, and he is a remarkably weak politician who is afraid to call an election because he'll get wiped out by Pierre Poilievre. And so I'm not really worried about what Canada thinks. And I think we want to distinguish the Canadians, who are wonderful people, from the Canadian government, which is a complete laughingstock, actually. They sanctioned Israel, and Israel didn't actually buy many weapons from them, but they stopped weapon shipment. Trudeau is kind of a joke. And if he had a long talk with Donald Trump, I guarantee you Donald Trump did most of the talking. And he's not long for that job in any event. So we're not worried about that. We are worried. It's only about 15,000 people have crossed the northern border over the last 16 months or so. That's what I read up on today, about 15,000 people. Fentanyl is real, also coming from Canada. So it's important to bring Canada into this conversation to get them straightened out on the northern border. But the real problem is China and Mexico. And the number of migrants coming through Mexico is something they can and have controlled in the past. The amount of fentanyl precursors coming from China is something that they have limited or agreed to limit in the past, and they haven't followed through. Now, to the comparison with Israel, I loved your monologue, Leland. There's only one thing I want to disagree with. Joe Biden today at the White House said this brings to a close the war with Hezbollah. It does not bring to a close the war with Hezbollah. A ceasefire is, by definition, not a treaty, not a surrender. It is a ceasefire. And Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, was very explicit today. If Hezbollah does anything, if it burps, he's back in. Yep. 60 days takes us into the Trump administration. And after 60 days, the weapon shipments will begin again that have been slow-walked or stalled in some portions by Team Biden. We cannot wait to get a real foreign policy back as opposed to team appeasement, which is in the White House right now.
You call them team appeasement. We have the graphic ready. Antony Blinken, Lloyd Austin, Jake Sullivan, and Joe Biden leading the charge. It was interesting today when he held this press conference, when Joe Biden did, because he's been working for 14 months to get a ceasefire in Gaza. Hasn't happened. I think he hopes that people over Thanksgiving dinner conflate Hamas and Hezbollah, and somehow he gets credit for said ceasefire. But this is what President Biden said again today to the Israelis who have defied him over and over and over again. Take a listen.
Israel has been bold on the battlefield. Iran and its proxies have paid a very heavy price. Now Israel must be bold in turning tactical gains against Iran and its proxies into a coherent strategy.
It's just mind-boggling to me that after having gotten this wrong for so long, he feels that he has the position, I guess, if you're president of the United States, you feel like you do, to tell the Israelis, number one, to do anything, but number two, basically be bold, is offer more concessions to Iran.
There is one stick that Joe Biden has, and I listened to the commentary podcast today, Leland, and they were talking about it. People have to remember in 2016, when Barack Obama was a lame duck, on December 22nd or 23rd, the UN passed a Security Council resolution basically saying that all of Jerusalem was occupied territory, even the Western Wall, and that all Jewish settlements in Jerusalem, even in the Jewish quarter, were against international law. And we did not veto that. So it is the belief of those on the commentary pod, and I believe that they are accurate about this, that Israel was threatened into the ceasefire by virtue of a fear of a replay of the Obama endgame being the Biden endgame, a Security Council resolution some way injuring Israel. And what I heard Netanyahu say today is that 60 days, if they blink, we're going back in. I also want to say it might just be that you've done a lot of war reporting, Leland. It seems to me the Israelis are either completely aware of everything Hezbollah is doing, or they've got a spy in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps inside of Khamenei's inner circle. They're just going to wait for Hezbollah to redeploy its tattered remnants somewhere else. And after 60 days, if they have to, they'll do another pager, another beeper, another walkie-talkie, another Hassan Nasrallah wipeout. They are very capable of destroying the remnants of Hezbollah if they want to in 60 days.
I think all of what you said is true, and I would add to that the Iranians have totally changed their tune, too, now that Donald Trump has won, right? Because they promised all of this retribution after Israel hit their nuclear site, which Joe Biden said don't do. Israel did anyway. And then Donald Trump gets elected, and we haven't heard boo out of the Iranians. And if anything, the Iranians have sold Hezbollah down the river because they can't get arms shipments into them, and have said basically you're on your own, and said the same thing to Hamas, which sort of proves the point, right? That if Joe Biden had kept up the maximum pressure campaign of Donald Trump on Iran, Iran wouldn't have done any of this stuff. We wouldn't have had October 7th. We wouldn't have had all the attacks on U.S. troops.
Maximum pressure is coming back, Leland. Brian Hook is the leader of the Trump transition at the Department of State, where Marco Rubio is. Ambassador Hook led the Iranian effort of maximum pressure during Trump 1.0. He'll be back in Trump 2.0. The same policies will be back. Iranian oil will be sanctioned. And now all their S-300s are destroyed. Their anti-aircraft, as you showed the pictures. Israel can go anywhere. We can go anywhere in Iranian airspace. And I believe Israel will if, in fact, they are hit a third time. So you mentioned paper tiger. I don't think Iran is a paper tiger because I think they are fanatics and they are theocrats and they want a nuclear weapon. But they are significantly more vulnerable than they were 14 months ago. So when we go back to 14 months ago, I asked Aviv Reddick-Gur yesterday, a Times of Israel analyst, and I think maybe one of the best in the Middle East, along with Dr. Oren, whether or not Israelis were better off 14 months after the massacre and whether worldwide Jewry was. And Aviv's answer was, Israelis feel much more secure. Deterrence has been restored. But worldwide Jewry is in a much more perilous place because of the last 14 months. And that is largely because America did not stand up and stay strong after a good start by President Biden when he went to Israel. It's been backpedaling since.
Incredibly fair and thoughtful analysis. Hugh, it's Thanksgiving on Thursday. We're thankful for you and for your friendship and doing the show. We'll see you sometime soon, my friend.
And that is back at you. Thank you, Leland. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Walmart says it is done with DEI. How one man on Twitter exposed the fraud and flipped the script on all of those do-gooding CEOs. Walmart, especially around the holidays, is known for rolling back prices. Now the company is rolling back on wokeism. Walmart will stop using the terms DEI and Latinx throughout its operations. It will no longer put its employees through training with the Racial Equity Institute, and it will be terminating its Racial Equity Center, which was established back in 2020 during the height of the George Floyd protests. The man behind Walmart quitting DEI is somebody you know if you watch the show, Robbie Starbuck. He's a conservative activist who's forced other major Fortune 500 companies to end their DEI programs. Walmart now joins the lineup of Lowe's, Ford, John Deere, Tractor Supply, and more. Walmart CEO John Feuermer was asked about the shift away from DEI on CBS Mornings.
Like many companies all across the United States, we've been on a journey and we continue to be on a journey. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that every customer, every associate feels welcome here to shop and to feel like they belong.
Robbie Starbuck is with us now. I think what's interesting is what the CEO said was basically what should be true for all of us, which is everybody gets treated equally and everybody gets treated with respect. Nobody's better or special because of how they identify themselves, and we all can shop at Walmart.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, it just sounds like the way you normally treat people. If you're a normal person, you just kind of go about your business. Now, we all have red lines, right? Like, don't sexualize children. That should be very clear. These are the types of things that are changing, is no more racial discrimination through DEI programs that explicitly have ended up discriminating against white people in many cases across many of these companies, or sexualizing kids by selling products that are inappropriate, or, you know, funding things like drag events where children are exposed to extremely inappropriate sexual conduct. I think all of these things or common sense that we're asking for. We're not actually asking companies to adopt my politics or the Republican Party's politics. We're just asking for neutrality and taking divisive issues out of the workplace so that people can just work again and customers don't have to wonder or worry that the money they spend at companies is going to be turned around and spent on priorities and on social causes that they're vehemently opposed to.
I understand that. And look, it's an enormous amount of money, right? With Walmart, $100 million committed to the Center for Racial Equity, $80 million invested in various DEI-related programs and initiatives. There's big money in DEI. The Human Rights Campaign, which I know is an organization you've targeted, said, tell corporate America Robbie Starbuck is an extremist troll and dropping inclusivity initiatives is not okay. Ford, Molson Coors, and Lowe's are a handful of companies that have cowardly succumbed to these anti-business demands. We will send your message to stand by LGBTQ plus workers to their corporate executives. This is what I think is interesting, because when you went after Tractor Supply in the very beginning, we followed it and covered it. It took a long time. You exposed what they were doing. You went through each one of their programs, on and on and on and on. Then they caved. And now you basically put on Twitter last night, hey, we went to Walmart, we told them we had all the goods of what they were doing with DEI, and they proactively caved and put their CEO on CBS Mornings to sort of do a mea culpa. To me, it exposes, and I'll let you get the last word, to me it exposes this concept that they didn't really believe this at all, right? There's none of these CEOs and companies that are coming back to you and say, you know what, Robbie? DEI and inclusion and spending money on this is what we believe in. Our customers demand it. And you, Robbie, and all your followers on Twitter can go pound sand.
Well, before we get to that, because it's a little different than you would expect, I just want to point out the HRC statement calling me an extremist. We're talking about a group, the HRC, who believes that children should be allowed to get sex changes. Okay, so
no, we've done a lot on HRC. We're with you on that.
The extremists define themselves. But yes, when it comes to the CEOs, actually, a few have tried to dig in privately. I keep all off-the-record calls with CEOs private, but I will say some have tried to dig in. And in those cases, those are some that have gone on for 2-3 weeks. And then the market comes and brings pressure to bear that those CEOs cannot stand tall with. So they end up falling in every case. We have a 100% success rate. So whether they do or not, I will say this, companies have tried every different type of tactic to deal with us, and they've failed on every front. So now we've gotten to the point where companies are working with us from the outset when we reach out to them, like Toyota just did, like Walmart just did. Companies are seeing the wisdom in that, and I think they're very smart for doing so.
Well, to a certain extent, probably there's a number of these CEOs who feel set free, right? Because they were kind of held hostage by these groups. The Human Rights Campaign top sponsors, Accenture, Amazon, Apple, American Airlines, CVS, Google, JP Morgan, Lyft, Macy's, Marriott, Match, Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, Nationwide, Pfizer, and the Walt Disney Company. Are any of these next?
There's certainly some that are on our list. I mean, one of the ones that they shouted out at their recent gala was Lexus, owned by Toyota. And so I picked that out of a hat, essentially, and said, well, that's going to be next. And we got Toyota to flip. So they're losing sponsors every day, essentially. I mean, they're losing support all the time. And I think the HRC is going to have a very difficult time operating over the next 4 years.
So I got in a fight on radio on your behalf, because I do a radio hit every day in Chicago about an hour before the show. And somebody kept saying to me that I don't want to do away with equality. And I said, well, equity and equality are two very different things. Equality is equality of outcome. Equity is equality of outcome. And equality is equality of choice, or of chance, of opportunity. Is this just going to come back with different definitions?
Well, if it does, I think the companies are aware of the consequences of what that'll look like. And we've been very clear about that in our conversations with companies that, look, we're wise to all of the new terms. We're wise to all the ways they'll try to shift this. And if you go that route, we're going to do the same thing, but it's going to be much worse the second time. And there's actually a company, I won't say who yet, but there's a company that has started to stray out of line a little bit from one of the top 20 that we had started with. And I think it will be much worse the second time, because people don't appreciate being lied to, and consumers will react even more wildly to a company pretending to be one thing and lying about it and then doing the opposite. And so I think that's something the other companies are very wise to. We have whistleblowers at every one of the companies that we have exposed.
I can imagine you hear from a lot of folks.
We hear about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right, come back and talk to us about that. I think that's fascinating, because there are a lot of consumers out there who listen to you and who care about this. So we appreciate it. Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The biggest new hit on TV celebrates, of all things, oil. And men being, well, men, even oil men. How crude rules became hot again.
Sticking with beer, you want something stronger? I quit drinking, I'll stick with beer. Welcome to the oil business.
They finally spoke. They are the Kamala Harris campaign managers who managed to spend $1 billion and still lose the election. So this morning in the gym, I listened to Pod Save America. That is the elite of the elite liberal thought leaders explaining why Kamala Harris lost the election. And I learned a number of things. Harris was behind from the start. Voters wanted change. Democrats were short on time. Harris had a favorability deficit for which they blamed the negative media. Voters forgot how bad Trump was and is. Biden was historically unpopular. Voters didn't know Harris. Harris was too loyal to Joe Biden. Trump's campaign was racist by trying to recruit black men. That was 47 minutes in, and my workout was about done. So I got to the end, not of the podcast, went on for 90 minutes, but I got to the end of my workout and found my favorite reason, as told by the Biden-Harris campaign managers, or the Harris campaign managers. Democratic lawyers wouldn't let them break the law as they allege Republicans did. Here's former senior advisor to President Obama, who advised the Harris campaign, David Plouffe.
We have to stop playing a different game as it relates to super PACs than the Republicans. Love our Democratic lawyers. I'm tired of it. Okay. Clearly, it is not legal what they're doing, but we are at a disadvantage when our folks are playing by a different set of rules than they are.
So in the 50 minutes I listened to, the one thing they never acknowledged, in fact, the one thing they didn't even talk about, was how poor of a candidate Kamala Harris was. Jasmine Wright, Notice Politics reporter, Richard Goodstein, Democratic strategist, former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, with us now. I'm going to borrow a phrase that Democrats want to be unburdened by what has been and somehow believe their message was awesome, it was perfect, and it was the voters who screwed up. And Richard, I would start with you. Democratic circles, are they having this conversation, at least not on podcasts, that maybe Kamala Harris wasn't the right pick?
Well, I think some Democrats are asking, given the worldwide movement for change, there wasn't a right-left thing. We saw labor come in the UK. Given the state of the economy, with inflation being as bad as it was, thank you, supply chain, thank you, Trump's buddy Putin in Ukraine, and immigration, which was obviously a problem that was mishandled. It's amazing that, and Trump getting clipped on the ear by that assassin, it's amazing he didn't win by 20 points. That said, of course, Democrats are asking themselves, what can we do differently? How can we appeal to men, younger men in particular, which they did not do a particularly good job of? And if we had more than a 3-month campaign, what could we do differently going forward? But I don't think, frankly, people are saying, had it been somebody substituted instead of Kamala Harris when Joe Biden got out, that there would have been a different outcome.
I guess, Jasmine, maybe that's the point, right? Kamala Harris is who she was. She was the same person who didn't make it to Iowa, much less out of Iowa in 2020, because she was unpopular as a candidate. And maybe the underlying diagnosis here, right, that perhaps even the Harris team doesn't want to say is the person they really blame is Joe Biden for not getting out sooner.
Oh, well, Leland, I think that they absolutely did say that they blamed Joe Biden. They criticized Joe Biden numerous times on that podcast, basically putting the onus on him. And I don't necessarily think that's incorrect, of course, because he stayed in the race as long as he did. Listen, I've heard from a lot of Democrats today after this podcast, including people who were outside the campaign, but also inside the campaign. And most of the criticism that I heard, Leland, was for the actual campaign leadership, for what people believed is them not taking responsibility.
Yeah, no, they blamed everybody but themselves as well. Interestingly enough, for the first time since her concession speech, just in the past 15 minutes, on social media, Kamala Harris posted a video. Take a listen.
I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did.
Jasmine, any ideas why now, trying to reset for Thanksgiving, when this was recorded in Hawaii, what's happening?
I think that she was always going to have to address her supporters more fulsome and again after the concession speech. Now, of course, the people who I've talked to who want the vice president to kind of mount another political opportunity or political career, there's certainly people who I've talked to who don't want her to, but the people who I've talked to who do want her to, they say that she has to do it in a very quick ramp. So I think that that's some of the reason, at least why they're hopeful that the vice president will continue to speak out to the American public. But when I talk to people about the podcast and about the vice president's comments today, a lot of people within the Democratic apparatus were really dismayed at those comments because, I'm not in the position to offer advice to Democrats. I'm a journalist. That's not what I do. But certainly what I've heard is that there has to be a real honest conversation about what went wrong, both political headwinds, but also strategically on the campaign that burned through that amount of money without that result that they wanted to see.
I hear you. I got to get to this last soundbite, but you make a good point. I think the other part about being honest is about attitude and about how Donald Trump's voters and supporters were treated by Democrats, by Kamala Harris, by the media. Just for an example, here's Alec Baldwin and Sharon Stone after the election, neither of which appear to have learned the lesson. Take a listen.
Americans are very uninformed about reality, what's really going on.
My country is in its adolescence. Adolescence is very arrogant. Adolescence thinks it knows everything. Adolescence is naive and ignorant and arrogant.
Both of them were, I believe, in Italy, so I'm old enough to remember when politics stopped at the water's edge. Those were the quaint old times, Richard. But look, they speak for a lot of Democrats, people you hang out with at fancy parties, Richard. When are y'all going to learn?
Look, Trump got less than half the vote. So it wasn't like there was this blowout. I don't think they do speak for Democrats, in fact. I think there's a sense that Democrats need to speak more to working people.
You can't speak to working people when you're calling them stupid and arrogant and adolescent, though.
But Democrats aren't. No, Hakeem Jeffries isn't. Chuck Schumer isn't. Okay. These people who won in these states that Trump won for the Senate, all four of them, they weren't speaking down. So, no, I actually think Democratic leaders aren't speaking like that. And if anything, they should use that as a sister soldier moment, the Democratic leaders, to say, we're not that. We're actually speaking to
that would be fascinating if that happened. And look, you just did it, Richard. There it is. That is the kind of come together we need at a Thanksgiving table. Jasmine, I would be remiss if I didn't say congratulations on an amazing campaign of reporting. It was just awesome and awesome having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. I love coming on.
We'll talk to you both soon. And
Happy Thanksgiving.
Love reading your writing, Jasmine. Joe Biden might have figured out how to put Donald Trump in a real pickle as he leaves the White House. How free Ozempic could make Trump's first 100 days a nightmare. Biden wants to make Ozempic free for overweight people on Medicare and Medicaid. Who could be against Ozempic? Who could be against free Ozempic? Turns out Trump's new health czar and Make America Healthy Again crusader, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is just that man.
For half the price of Ozempic, we could purchase regeneratively raised organic agriculture, or organic food for every American, 3 meals a day, and gym membership for every obese American. They make this drug in Denmark, and in Denmark, they do not recommend it for diabetes or for obesity. They recommend dietary and behavioral changes. In our country, they're counting on selling it to Americans because we're so stupid and so addicted to drugs.
So here's how it works. More than 100 million Americans are considered obese. If Biden goes through with the proposal, the Trump administration will not only have to pay for the Ozempic, but deal with Kennedy, who wants to take it away, and probably a lot of Americans who would then like their Ozempic. Dr. Deborah Birx, former White House COVID response coordinator, is with us now. Dr. Birx, it's always good to see you back here. And boy, to do this 54 days before the administration changes, it feels like this is President Biden just leaving one there on the table for him, huh?
I
I think they can really turn this into an opportunity. So Robert Kennedy can really bring forward his concept about clean food, decreasing additives. Dr. Oz can bring together his clean food, exercise, and they can have a real debate about what is best for the American people and lay out their plan. I think he can turn this into a tremendous opportunity. There will be individuals that fail. It happens with all things in medicine where you have to provide additional support. But he would be able to both have what he wants to do with diet and exercise and support the people who need additional support. And he can take control of the message. I think it's a layup for them and how they could really approach this.
For them being Team Trump to sort of take this and say, okay, you can have free Ozempic, or you can have a gym membership, or you can have both. And the like, just in terms of how this works, is it really up to the Biden administration to just unilaterally say this? $35 billion is what it would cost America to give this drug out?
No, that's what I'm talking about. This is a time where they could have that debate.
Oh, you have that debate right now?
Yes, because it's open for comment. The rulemaking takes a lot of time within CMS, so they cannot do this in the next 60 days. It will be open for comment. It will need congressional support, but they can start with their own messaging now and talk about what their approach is going to be and where that narrow for those people who need it. I don't think you give it everybody, but you can really put out the food piece and the exercise piece, and the people who fail that could have this as a safety net. So it gives them a real opportunity to lay out what their plan for America is.
One thing I've noticed from the scientific community, and I use intentionally a very broad umbrella when I say that, is this reflexive need to discredit everything that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says because he has some admittedly wackadoodle ideas on some things. Why do you think they're so threatened by him on the very legitimate points of why is a drug used in the United States for diabetes that's not used in Denmark? Why have disease rates in America skyrocketed? Why does our food have so many chemicals in it?
I think sometimes in public health and in the science community, they think that Americans can't understand nuance, just like you just talked about on the last segment, that they think that we can't understand the difference between clean food, exercise, and the potential need for a weight loss drug on top of that in a subgroup of patients. I think they think the American people can't understand how these things work. I find no matter where I've worked in the world, communities and people can understand you if you explain it to them correctly. And we demean people by acting like they can't understand science and data. They can. I've seen it every place I've worked. And I think that's why they can really turn this into an opportunity to come forth with their information and data and really sell it to the American people. The American people are smart. They'll understand it. Now, that said, there are always a segment that will need additional support.
No, I get it. I think you're such a diplomat, though. You're such a diplomat because I was about to say, because you don't win over people by telling them they're stupid. Not understand is a much more diplomatic way to say it, ma'am. Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Happy Thanksgiving.
And to you and yours, ma'am. The hottest show on TV right now is Unabashedly Crude. It's about crude oil and crude men. Does America's love affair with Billy Bob Thornton explain Trump's win? Come Sunday, Rachel and I will take an hour break, 1 hour only, from watching football to watch our new favorite show. It's called Landman. And we aren't the only ones who like it. It's one of the most popular shows on TV right now. It celebrates all things that were canceled 4 years ago. Country music, crude men, and crude oil. Here is the star, Billy Bob Thornton.
If the whole world decided to go electric tomorrow, we don't have the transmission lines to get the electricity to the cities. It'd take 30 years if we started tomorrow. And unfortunately for your grandkids, we have a 120-year petroleum-based infrastructure. Our whole lives depend on it. And hell, it's in everything. That road we came in on, the wheels on every car ever made, including yours.
Talking like that used to get you canceled. Now it's making Paramount Plus millions of dollars. With us now, Daniel Turner, founder, executive director of Power to the Future, and an energy and environmental expert. Daniel, good to see you. Help me understand here. What came first, the resurgence of oil and gas in America or Donald Trump's election?
The resurgence of oil and gas, because it was taken away from them, right? We saw 4 years of the Biden policies, and it affected everything from world peace and international relations to the cost of bread and eggs. And the American people saw that, and they brought it to the electorate. And we had a campaign all season. Energy is everything, and it really is, not just because I advocate for it, but energy is absolutely everything. And we've had 4 years of bad energy policies, and Americans are catching up to it. So kudos to Tyler Sheridan for, finger on the pulse of American culture and making a TV show about it.
You said American culture, right? In politics is downstream of culture. I'll forego any reference to what is downstream in oil. Everything really is downstream of crude oil in American business. What about this show makes sort of it all okay? Is it because it shows America what goes into it? What do you think he's picked up on?
I think there's a desire for plain-speaking folks, right? That's definitely some of Trump's appeal. It was also part of why Kamala Harris struggled so much on the campaign trail. She couldn't give a straight answer on anything, and the word salad became her standard MO. I think we're missing days of just plain-speaking folks, and that's what Billy Bob Thornton's character does in this. You can hate oil, you can hate me, but there are certain truths about this industry, and by burying your head in the climate change sand does not make those truths go away. So that's the real conversation we need to have with the environmental left, with the wind turbine advocates. The facts are still the facts, regardless of how many trillions we've wasted to try to get these wind and solar off the ground.
Daniel, you're way too likable to hate. You're way too likable, and Billy Bob Thornton is way too charismatic to hate. He's much like Kevin Costner, right, in Yellowstone, Tyler Sheridan's other hit film. All right, Daniel, thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. One more show till Thanksgiving, so I'll say it now in case you're spending tomorrow with your family. We're thankful for you. Tell your friends about News Nation.